Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to discuss the Rambam's ruling in Hilchos Yibum Vachalitzah, Perek Vav, Halacha Yutes. The Rambam says as follows: Isha shezinas tachas baila beratzon uve'edim. A woman who commits adultery, and she does it voluntarily, willingly, and there are witnesses to that effect. So we know that she's, of course, forbidden to her husband. Umeis, and the husband dies, kaidem shigar shana, before he gives her a get, because he's obligated to give her a get, but he dies before. So what's the problem? V'nafla lifnei yavam, and she now falls before the yavam, the brother-in-law, because the Torah says that if a person dies childless, the wife has to marry the husband's brother. That's called Yibum, and if not, then there's a need for Vachalitzah. So now she's now subject to this discussion whether she needs Yibum or Vachalitzah. Harihi peturim min Vachalitzah min Yibum. So the Rambam says that she's released from both Vachalitzah and Yibum. She doesn't need Vachalitzah to remarry. Why is that? But before he explains, he says, B'chein Tzaras. Likewise, the co-wife. The co-wife, who is not guilty of anything, cannot marry the brother-in-law. Why is that? Safek Ervah, as if she was considered to be in the category of the forbidden relationships, such as a sibling, a child, and so on and so forth, all the arayos. And this is also one of the arayos, the adultery. The Torah uses an expression that she is called tamei, a similar expression is used for other forbidden relationships, incestuous relationships, and the like. So, in this case, since she is forbidden to the husband, to the yavam, to the brother-in-law, she neither could have Yibum, she's not allowed to have Yibum, but she doesn't need Vachalitzah either. She's completely off limits, and likewise the Tzara, the co-wife. But then he says the following, and this is which the commentaries look at as problematic. Alval Sotah, but a woman merely suspected of adultery, what does that mean? That a woman was warned by her husband not to be secluded with a man, and she is secluded, and the husband has to take her to Yerushalayim, where she's given a special drink of mayim hamarim, the bitter waters. If she's guilty, miraculously, she would die. If she was innocent, everything would be fine. So what happens? And until that time, she's forbidden to her husband. So Sotah shemeiz baila kaidem shiashkena mehamarim. She dies. The husband dies before he gave her the waters to drink. Now, what's the halacha here? Now the husband dies. They were childless. What is the relationship between her and her husband's brother? Harizu cheletzes v'lo misyavemes. She cannot have Yibum. She's forbidden, just like she's forbidden to the husband, she's forbidden to the brother-in-law. But she does need Vachalitzah. She does need Vachalitzah. Then the Rambam says the following: if she had a co-wife, her co-wife is permitted b'cheletzes, and she either gets Vachalitzah, or she can even marry the husband's brother. And here is the question the commentaries ask: why should the tzara, the co-wife, be permitted to have Yibum? What are we talking about? We're talking about a woman suspected of adultery. If she was definitely guilty of adultery, that is considered to be an ervah. And the law is that an ervah releases the tzara, and the tzara cannot marry the brother-in-law. Okay, now this case of a Sotah, it's a Safek Ervah. It's a doubt whether she's an ervah. If there's a doubt, how could you allow her to be misyavam? It could be she is an ervah, and therefore she's forbidden. There should definitely need Vachalitzah, but absolutely no Yibum. And here the Rambam says is either Vachalitzah or even Yibum. How could that be? So Rabbi Chaim Brisker, in his classic Chedushim on the Rambam, and it's hinted in the Ha'ara in a note of Rabbi Kiva Eger on the Rambam, and he says the following: when we look at a Sotah, a woman suspected of adultery, you imagine that it's considered to be a Safek Ervah. It's a doubt whether she committed adultery. Since certain adultery is an Ervah, the Safek, the doubt, makes it something that is also forbidden. Because when we deal with biblical laws, a doubt has to take the stringent side. If you don't have the knowledge about a certain food, if it's kosher or not, there's a Safek, you can't eat it. Why? Because Safek of a prohibition, biblical prohibition, is forbidden. So we assumed that a Sotah is a Safek Ervah. Based on that assumption, it makes no sense that we should allow the Tzara to have Yibum, because the Tzara of an Ervah is forbidden. In this case, we don't know if it's an Ervah, so we have to take the stricter side. So Reb Chaim says that's not true. That whole premise is faulty. He says a Sotah is not considered a Safek Ervah. Why is that? Because the fact that she was secluded with a man, that's absolutely forbidden, that's a prohibition of yichud, but it's not considered adultery. And therefore, it's not even a Safek, it's not even a question, a doubt. Why isn't it a doubt? Because every person, every woman in this case, has a cheskes kashrus, has a presumption of being compliant with halacha, with the Torah's laws, has a presumption of innocence, as they would say in America. And therefore, just because she did something unbecoming, something that's unethical and something that's wrong, even halachically prohibited, doesn't make her a Safek of an Ervah. But when the husband warns her, the Torah gives her a new status, that she is a Sotah, which means that she is forbidden to her husband, but not because it's a Safek Ervah. It's because there's a certain status conferred upon her through the husband's warning. And Reb Chaim brings a proof. There's a dispute in the Gemara. What happens if the husband on the way to the Yerushalayim, before they give her to drink, he said, I'm Heschel, I forgive her, I withdraw my warning. She's no longer considered a Sotah, and she's permitted to her husband. Why is that? If there's a presumption, if the presumption of her innocence has been removed, and we consider her to be guilty, at least possibly guilty, and therefore forbidden, then what good is it the husband says, I forgive her? You can't forgive someone for committing a crime. That proves that the only reason she's forbidden is because there's a certain status that the Torah gives her when the husband gives her a warning. When the husband withdraws the warning, that status is removed. Therefore, the Sotah, in this case, where she didn't drink the water and her husband dies, she's not a Safek Ervah. She's a Sotah, which has its own status. And because she's a Sotah, she's not an Ervah, the Tzara has no reason not to have Yibum, because only a Tzara, a co-wife of an Ervah, is exempted from Yibum. That's the gist of Reb Chaim's statement. There's another question here on the Rambam. The Rambam here makes it clear that this woman who is suspected of adultery is forbidden to have Yibum, but she does need Chalitza. That means that there's no chorus. It's not an erva where there is actually chorus, which is a severe penalty, not just a lav, not just a negative commandment. And as the Maggid Mishnah says, it's just like chayv lavin. It would be the same thing as someone who violated a negative commandment in marrying this woman, where the tzara is permitted. So in other words, according to the Maggid Mishnah, there is no chorus when this Yavam takes this Sotah. Okay. Now we go to Hilchos Mamrim in the Rambam, Perik Revi Halacha Beis, where the Rambam has a lengthy discussion about Zaken Mamre, the law of a rebellious sage who goes against the majority of the Sanhedrin, and he's Chayiv Misa. So it's only if what he goes against involves a matter in which there's chorus. So the Rambam says, he gives an example, among many examples, they argue whether this woman needs to drink to verify her innocence, or she doesn't need. for example, there's a dispute if you need two witnesses to warn the woman or the husband, or one witness is enough. So if you say, if you follow the one who says you need to have, she needs to drink, and the husband dies before she drinks, she's forbidden to the Yavam. And the implication is that if she marries the Yavam, it's Karas. Because otherwise, why would he be a Zaken Mamre? Well, if you hold that she doesn't need to drink, then there could be Yibum. So from here we see that the Rambam holds that a woman who is a Sotah, and before she drinks, and if we hold that she has to drink, she is forbidden to the Yavam, and there is an Isser Karas. So the question is, why was there an Isser Karas? The Rambam in Hilchos Yibum Vachalitzah maintains that it's like Chayv Ilavan. It's like a negative commandment. And a negative commandment is no Karas. So Rabbi Kiva Eger answers, and he says that you're right. There's no negative. There's only a negative commandment that she's not an erva. But once the Torah releases her and says they can't be yibum, then it's shaloi b'makom mitzvah. Then the relationship between her and her brother-in-law doesn't involve a mitzvah of yibum. If it doesn't involve a mitzvah of yibum, then she remains an eishes ach, her husband's, the wife of her husband's brother. And that is one of the arayos. And for that there is karas. So there's no karas for the fact that he took a Sotah. There's no karas there. But once the Sotah is released from the mitzvah of Yibum, then she goes back to being an eishes ach, shaloi b'makom mitzvah.